What if I told you that peace isn't something you wait for, it's something you practice, even when people try to pull you out of it? We live in a world where being offended is almost inevitable. People cut you off in traffic, send passive-aggressive texts, misunderstand your tone, and project their chaos onto you. It's exhausting, but here's the truth no one tells you. You don't have to absorb what isn't yours. Imagine reclaiming your calm no matter what or who tries to steal it. This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending to be unbothered. This is about mastering the art of choosing your response over your reaction. Because the most powerful person in any room isn't the loudest. It's the one who stays in control of themselves when everyone else is losing theirs. Stay with me, because in this speech we'll unpack how to stop being reactive, why people constantly test your peace, and how you can step into a version of yourself that isn't moved by every wind of negativity. Emotion isn't the enemy, reaction is. This is where most of us misunderstand ourselves. We're conditioned to believe that feeling angry, frustrated, or overwhelmed is a sign of weakness or emotional instability, but the truth is far more nuanced. Emotions are data, they are information about our internal and external environment. When something makes you angry, your body and mind are signaling that a boundary has been crossed, an expectation has been broken, or an injustice has occurred. That emotion in itself is not wrong. In fact, it's incredibly valuable. The real danger arises when we allow that emotion to hijack our behavior, cloud our clarity, or burn bridges we may later wish we hadn't. The enemy isn't the feeling, it's what we impulsively do with it. And the problem is, most of us haven't been taught how to pause between the emotion and the action. This space between stimulus and response is where our power lies. It's in that pause, those few seconds of mindfulness, that we can choose something different. We can choose to respond with intelligence, grace, or even silence. And that choice can change everything. We need to normalize the fact that feeling angry or hurt doesn't make you broken, it makes you human. It's what you do next that defines your strength. There's a dangerous narrative out there that suggests enlightened or strong people don't feel anything. That real peace means you're always calm, always composed, always unfazed. But that isn't peace, that's suppression. Real peace is when you feel the wave of anger rise inside you, but you don't let it drown you or pull you under. You watch it, name it, sit with it, and then choose a response aligned with your values rather than your wounds. You don't deny the emotion, you transform it. This takes awareness, and awareness takes practice. You start by noticing the physiological cues. The quickening heartbeat, the clenched jaw, the heat rising in your chest. These are signals, not commands. They are telling you, something needs your attention, not, lose control now. When you learn to observe instead of obey those signals, you regain your emotional sovereignty. Another important piece is understanding the root of your triggers. Often, what we react to in the moment is connected to a much deeper wound from our past. The coworker who interrupted you might not be the actual issue. It might be the unresolved childhood memory of never feeling heard. The partner who forgot something small might be poking at an old scar of being forgotten altogether. When we don't explore the deeper origin of our anger, we end up reacting not just to the present moment, but to every unhealed version of ourselves all at once. That's why the reaction feels so intense and out of proportion. It's not just about now, it's about then. And until we deal with the then, we will keep overreacting to the now. This is why self-awareness is such a powerful antidote to reactive living. The more you understand your emotional landscape, the less likely you are to explode, collapse, or disengage in destructive ways. Lastly, we must challenge the idea that being reactive somehow makes us more powerful or real. There's a glorification of unfiltered emotion in our culture, a belief that saying exactly what's on your mind, no matter how harmful, is authentic. But unfiltered doesn't mean honest, it often means undisciplined. True authenticity is expressing your truth with respect, intention, and timing. It's not just about being heard, it's about being understood, And that doesn't happen through yelling, blaming, or emotional volatility. It happens through self-regulated presence. You can be angry and still be kind. You can feel betrayed and still speak with clarity. You can be hurt and still be wise. Emotional maturity is not the absence of emotion, it's the presence of choice. It's when your feelings are passengers in your vehicle, but you remain the driver. That's the difference between reacting and responding. One is chaos, the other is power. People project what they can't process. It's one of the hardest truths to accept because when someone hurts us, we instinctively internalize it. We assume their actions are a reflection of us, our worth, our flaws, our mistakes. But the reality is that most of the things people say or do, especially when it's unkind, dismissive, or cold, are more about them than about you. When someone is emotionally overwhelmed, carrying unresolved trauma, or lacks self-awareness, they often don't know how to sit with their discomfort. So instead of turning inward to understand it, they turn outward and deflect it. That anger they can't face becomes sarcasm. That fear they can't name becomes control. That insecurity they won't acknowledge becomes criticism. And the people closest to them often become the mirror they unconsciously shatter. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism. It protects the ego by offloading inner chaos onto external sources. Instead of confronting our own jealousy, we accuse someone else of being competitive. Instead of admitting our own fear of abandonment, we blame someone else for being too clingy. These responses are rarely conscious. Most people don't wake up and think, I'm going to take my unresolved childhood pain and weaponize it against someone I love today. It doesn't work that way. Projection is sneaky. It dresses itself in logic, self-righteousness, and half-truths. It disguises pain as opinion, trauma as personality, and fear as certainty. And because it often comes from those we care about, it can feel deeply personal. But just because something feels personal doesn't mean it is personal. Understanding this changes everything. When you begin to realize that someone's cruelty might stem from their own shame, or that their dismissiveness is rooted in how little they value themselves, a new kind of compassion is born. Not the kind that excuses bad behavior, but the kind that frees you from carrying it. You begin to stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "What must they be going through to show up like this?" That question doesn't make you naive, it makes you wise. Because you learn that most aggression is a mask for fear, most coldness is a shield for vulnerability, and most arrogance is a cry for validation. When people can't process their own emotional truth, they try to hand it to someone else. And the more unaware they are, the more forcefully they project it. It's especially difficult when projection comes from someone you love, because you want to believe their words even when they hurt. You want to fix what they see in you, not realizing they're actually describing parts of themselves they haven't accepted. This is where boundaries become crucial. Boundaries don't mean you don't care. They mean you understand the difference between what's yours and what isn't. When someone throws their emotional baggage at your feet, you have two choices: pick it up and carry it as if it's yours, or gently return it with, "This doesn't belong to me." That choice doesn't come easily. It takes inner work, reflection, and sometimes heartbreak to learn that you are not responsible for the projections of others. You're responsible for your own integrity, your own peace, your own self-awareness. It's important to recognize how we, too, might project what we can't process. None of us are immune. We've all, at some point, blamed someone else for something that was really about us. We've all misunderstood someone's silence as rejection because we were afraid of being left. We've all labeled someone too much because we hadn't yet made peace with our own emotions. The only way to interrupt the cycle is through self-inquiry. When you feel triggered, pause and ask, is this really about them, or is this about something I haven't faced in myself? That kind of questioning is how we break free from the chains of projection. It's how we stop bleeding on people who didn't cut us. It's how we begin to see others not as enemies or threats, but as reflections, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful, of where we are in our own healing. Projection thrives in silence and denial. It loses power in awareness. When you begin to recognize it in others, you gain perspective. You stop over-personalizing. You start observing. You step back and say, "That comment came from their wound, not my worth." This doesn't mean you tolerate abuse. It doesn't mean you stay in toxic dynamics. It means you no longer internalize someone else's emotional immaturity as your own failure. You become less reactive, less defensive, and more discerning. And that discernment is what protects your peace. Because when you realize that people project what they can't process, you also realize that their behavior doesn't define you, it defines them. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors with locks. This distinction is essential because too many people confuse having boundaries with shutting people out, being cold, or emotionally unavailable. But healthy boundaries aren't about isolation, they're about clarity. They don't say, "Stay away from me," they say, "Here's how I need to be treated if we're going to stay close." Boundaries are how we teach the world where we end and where others begin. They are not punishments, they are protections. They're not selfish, they're sacred. And the truth is, people who get offended by your boundaries are usually the ones who benefited from your lack of them. Setting boundaries is one of the most courageous and self-respecting acts a person can do, because it means finally choosing yourself in spaces where you once abandoned your own needs to make others comfortable. Too often, we mistake self-sacrifice for love. We think that being endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, and endlessly accommodating means we're good, loyal, or kind. But there's a cost to that kind of living. When you continually say yes out of guilt, when you keep giving access to people who drain you, when you ignore that gut feeling just to keep the peace, you don't just lose time, you lose yourself. Boundaries reclaim you. They bring you back to yourself. They tell the world, "I will no longer betray my inner truth just to maintain outer harmony." And while that decision may disrupt some relationships, it will deepen the ones that matter. Because real connection can only exist where there is mutual respect, and respect starts with honoring your own limits. Some people fear boundaries because they've been taught that saying no is rude or aggressive. But no is a complete sentence. It doesn't require justification, apology, or shame. You are not obligated to explain your healing, your pace, or your choices to people who only listen to respond rather than to understand. A locked door doesn't mean no one is allowed in. It means the right people will knock first. They will wait. They will ask. They will respect the structure you've built around your peace. The ones who barge in, who make demands, who shame you for changing, are revealing that they were never in your life for the right reasons. They were there for the access. And when you take that access back, their true character is revealed. Boundaries don't push good people away. They filter them in. What we also have to understand is that boundaries aren't just for others, they're also for ourselves. Setting boundaries with your own behaviors, your own impulses, your own patterns is just as necessary. Saying to yourself, "I don't chase what confuses me," or "I don't overextend for validation," is a boundary. Telling yourself, "I will no longer accept breadcrumbs when I deserve consistency," is a boundary. Boundaries aren't just something you communicate. They're something you embody. They show up in your decisions, your silence, your standards, your energy, and you don't need to announce every boundary you have. You just need to live by them. People learn more from how you move than from what you say. It's also important to recognize that boundaries are dynamic. They shift as you grow. What once felt acceptable may no longer serve you, and that's okay. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to require more than you did before. Growth often demands the reevaluation of what we tolerate, and that reevaluation can be uncomfortable, especially when people are used to your compliance. But discomfort is a small price to pay for authenticity. You weren't meant to live as a constant caretaker of other people's comfort at the expense of your own sanity. You weren't put here to shrink so others can stretch. You have a right to exist fully, to protect your space, to make decisions that reflect your values and vision. For many, setting boundaries feels unnatural at first. It can stir guilt, anxiety, and fear of rejection, but those emotions are not indicators that you're doing something wrong. They're signs that you're doing something new. And anything new requires practice. It requires staying grounded in your why. Why does this boundary matter? Why does your peace matter? Why does your emotional safety matter? The more you return to those truths, the more confident you become in your ability to honor yourself. And the more you honor yourself, the more you attract relationships, environments, and experiences that align with who you truly are. Boundaries are not about building walls that keep people out permanently. They are about installing doors with locks, so that only those who respect your space, energy, and humanity can come in. They allow for connection without codependency, compassion without self-betrayal, and generosity without depletion. They don't sever love, they refine it. They turn relationships from survival into sanctuary. And most of all, they affirm that your well-being isn't negotiable, that your space is sacred, and that your life is your own to protect, not someone else's to consume. You can't control people, only your participation. And that truth, while liberating, is also incredibly uncomfortable for many of us. We often enter situations, relationships, and conversations with the subconscious belief that if we say the right thing, explain enough, or love deeply enough, we can change people. We cling to the illusion that if we try hard enough, they'll see our worth, respect our boundaries, or treat us the way we deserve. But people are not projects, and they are not puzzles to be solved. They are who they are, and what you choose to accept or walk away from defines your peace far more than your ability to fix or convince someone. This realization is the foundation of emotional freedom because it shifts your focus from control to clarity, from managing their behavior to managing your own standards, limits, and choices. So much emotional exhaustion comes from trying to control what was never in our control in the first place. Someone else's intentions, maturity, emotional availability, or willingness to change. We keep pouring energy into the fantasy of who we want them to be instead of accepting the reality of who they've shown us they are. We rehearse conversations in our minds, trying to find the perfect combination of words that will finally make them understand. We bend, shrink, or twist ourselves into different versions, hoping one of them will finally be enough to earn basic respect or reciprocity. But no amount of effort on your end can transform someone who isn't willing to do the work on theirs. The truth is, people will only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves. And if they haven't done that inner work, they won't be able to hold space for you in the way you need. Not because you're unworthy, but because they're unavailable. Trying to control others, even if your intentions are pure, often leads to resentment and depletion. It keeps you trapped in a cycle of anxiety, constantly monitoring their moods, their words, their reactions. You begin to carry the emotional weight of the relationship alone, confusing responsibility with sacrifice. But it's not your job to rescue people from the consequences of their choices. It's not your role to make someone care, listen, change, or grow. That's their journey. Yours is to protect your peace by recognizing when your effort is no longer healthy, but harmful. You don't have to abandon love to protect yourself, but you do have to abandon the illusion that love can rewrite someone's character or maturity level if they're unwilling to change it themselves. Participation is power, and that means you get to choose when, how, and if you engage. You get to decide which conversations are worth your energy, which conflicts are worth your peace, and which dynamics are worth your presence. Just because someone invites you into chaos doesn't mean you have to RSVP. Not everything deserves a response. Not every opinion needs a rebuttal. Not every insult deserves defense. Sometimes the most powerful move is silence. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's refusing to argue with someone committed to misunderstanding you. This is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that your dignity is more valuable than temporary validation. It's trusting that your peace is not up for negotiation, even when your ego wants to stay and prove a point. One of the most important boundaries you'll ever set is the one between who people are and who you want them to be. When you stop trying to change them and start changing your response to them, you reclaim your emotional power. You realize that you can love someone and still leave. You can forgive someone and still never go back. You can hope for someone's growth and still not make yourself available for the version of them that harms you. Letting go of control doesn't mean giving up on people. It means giving up on the need to lose yourself in order to keep them. It means accepting that the only person you can shape is the one in the mirror. The deeper you understand this, the more peace you begin to experience. You stop reacting to everything. You stop over-explaining. You stop seeking closure in conversations that never lead anywhere. Instead, you focus on regulating your own emotions, tending to your own needs, and making choices that align with your values. You become less concerned with winning arguments and more invested in protecting your energy. You don't chase, because you understand that what's meant for you will never require you to beg, prove, or suffer. You don't force because you trust that mutual respect and effort are non-negotiable. You don't wait around for potential, you recognize patterns, and you respond accordingly. There is power in accepting that your influence has limits, but your participation is entirely up to you. That shift in perspective is where you begin to reclaim your life, not from others, but from the parts of yourself that believed staying, fixing, or fighting was the only way to be worthy of love or peace. Stillness is your superpower. In a world that constantly demands noise, speed, reaction, and presence, the ability to be still, truly still, is not only rare, it's revolutionary. We live in a culture that equates movement with progress and busyness with value. We are trained to believe that if we are not constantly doing, we are falling behind. But the truth is, some of the most profound clarity, healing, and transformation happen in the quiet. Not in the middle of the chaos, not in the response, not in the urgency to fix or speak or act, but in the pause, in the deliberate, conscious, unapologetic stillness where everything that truly matters begins to reveal itself. Stillness is not the absence of activity, it's the presence of awareness. It's the space between the stimulus and the response, the breath between what was and what will be. It is the place where your intuition lives, where your nervous system recalibrates, where your perspective realigns. And yet, it is often the most avoided space, because stillness demands something the world teaches us to fear: feeling. It requires us to sit with what's unresolved, to face what's been buried, to hear the voices we've drowned out with distractions. Stillness can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it is not the discomfort of punishment. It's the discomfort of truth surfacing. And that truth, once met, has the power to shift your entire internal landscape. In stillness, you begin to separate the noise of the world from the wisdom of your soul. You begin to realize how much of your life has been lived in reaction, reacting to expectations, reacting to wounds, reacting to projections, reacting to fear. You begin to notice how many of your choices weren't really yours, but responses to what others wanted or needed from you. And in that awareness, you find something sacred: choice. The power to choose differently, to break cycles, to detach from narratives that no longer define you. Stillness doesn't ask you to abandon your life. It asks you to return to it, not as a puppet of conditioning, but as the conscious author of your reality. Stillness allows for integration. We are constantly consuming information, emotions, experiences, but rarely do we stop to digest. And just like in the physical body, emotional and mental digestion is vital. Without it, everything becomes clogged, confused, chaotic. We begin to carry what was never ours, we lose sight of what's real, and we react to life from a place of emotional indigestion. Stillness clears that. It organizes your inner world. It says, "Let me understand this before I speak. Let me feel this fully before I move. Let me breathe before I respond." And in that breathing, in that being, something miraculous happens. You access a level of clarity that chaos could never offer. The more you practice stillness, the less power triggers have over you, because you stop reacting to the surface and start sensing the root. You don't need to raise your voice when you trust your energy. You don't need to rush to prove your point when you're grounded in your truth. You don't get pulled into every storm because you've learned to anchor within. This is not passivity, it's power, quiet power, rooted power, the kind of power that does not need to announce itself to be felt, the kind of power that doesn't need to dominate to hold authority, the kind of power that transforms rooms simply by being fully present. Stillness also teaches you detachment, not the cold, numb kind, but the wise kind, the kind that understands that not everything needs your energy, not everyone needs your explanation, and not every problem needs your involvement. You learn to conserve your peace like the sacred resource it is. You become selective, not out of ego, but out of self-respect. You start to realize that urgency is often the enemy of alignment, that rushing to respond, rushing to fix, rushing to be heard often leads to missteps and misunderstandings. Stillness slows you down long enough to hear the difference between your wounds and your wisdom. It helps you distinguish between what's urgent and what's important, between what's temporary and what's true. In stillness, you reconnect with your inner compass. You stop outsourcing your sense of direction to people who don't even know their own. You stop abandoning yourself for validation. You stop trying to control outcomes that are not in your hands. You realize that the most powerful thing you can do sometimes is nothing, not out of avoidance, but out of trust. Trust that what's meant for you won't require force. Trust that clarity will come when the noise quiets. Trust that peace is not something you have to chase. It's something you return to again and again in the quiet corners of your own being. Stillness is your superpower because it returns you to yourself. In a world that wants you loud, reactive, scattered, and distracted, choosing stillness is an act of rebellion. It's choosing depth over performance, wisdom over impulse, and truth over approval. And in that choice, you don't become less powerful, you become unstoppable. Peace is a daily practice, not a personality trait. It's not something you're born with or without, not a fixed quality reserved for the naturally calm. It's a discipline, an intentional, moment-to-moment choice to protect your energy, to respond with clarity instead of chaos, and to meet the world without letting it dismantle your inner world. Peace isn't passive. It doesn't mean you don't care, feel, hurt, or struggle. It means you've learned how to hold space for all of that without letting it consume you. It's the soft but firm voice inside you that whispers, I don't have to attend every argument I'm invited to. I don't have to internalize what's not mine. I don't have to react to feel powerful. Peace is a form of wisdom, cultivated not in easy moments, but in the hardest ones, when your anger wants to lead, when your ego wants to scream, when your fear wants to run. And in those moments, choosing peace isn't weakness, it's mastery. So many people mistake peace for silence or for a lack of boundaries, but true peace is full of structure and power. It's not about avoiding conflict at all costs. It's about knowing which conflicts are worth your time and energy. It's not about never being upset. It's about knowing how to move through that upset without wrecking everything around you. Peace is not a state you find and live in forever. It's something you return to over and over again, especially when the world gives you every reason not to. Every interaction, every challenge, every disappointment is an opportunity to choose your peace or abandon it. And the more you practice, the more peace becomes your home, not just your destination. To practice peace is to take radical responsibility for your triggers, your boundaries, your breath, and your emotional responses. It means catching yourself in the moment before you react, asking yourself what you actually need, and pausing long enough to respond with intention. That pause, that breath, is everything. That split second of awareness is the difference between carrying a wound and passing it on. Most people don't know they have that power. because they've never slowed down long enough to see it. But the truth is, you don't have to be ruled by what hurts you. You don't have to be governed by the energy around you. Peace means you lead yourself. It means you no longer live on autopilot, driven by patterns and pain. You pause, you process, you choose. Daily peace also requires the courage to disappoint people, to walk away from what doesn't serve your nervous system, to be misunderstood without needing to prove your point. You stop chasing closure where none exists, stop begging for people to value you, and stop performing emotional labor for those unwilling to meet you in that same depth. You begin to realize that peace sometimes sounds like, no, not today, or I need space. And while those words might upset others, you learn that your well-being is not up for negotiation. You stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm, and in doing so, you stop confusing peace with people-pleasing. Peace is not about being liked. It's about being aligned. Some days, practicing peace means holding your tongue when you'd rather lash out. Other days, it means speaking your truth, even if your voice shakes. It means learning the difference between being kind and being compliant. It means asking yourself, is this conversation bringing me closer to connection or pulling me further from it? It means taking responsibility for your own energy and not outsourcing your mood to every passing interaction. Peace isn't always pretty. It's not always soft and serene. Sometimes it's fierce. Sometimes it's boundaries. Sometimes it's walking away from love that doesn't love you back. But it's always rooted in self-respect and deep inner safety. Peace isn't a personality, it's a muscle. And like any muscle, it strengthens with use. You get better at staying grounded when others try to pull you into drama. You get better at being calm when you're provoked. You get better at choosing your silence not out of fear, but out of power. You begin to recognize that peace doesn't mean your life is perfect. It means you're no longer available for anything that threatens your inner harmony without your permission. The practice of peace becomes a sacred discipline, a quiet rebellion against a world addicted to reaction. And every time you choose it, you reclaim a piece of yourself that once got lost in the noise.